amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
And it's terrific to be with you, listeners. My guest today is Andrew Harper, Managing Director of the Cornerstone Group, Director of Harper Rural Holdings, past Director of the Museum of Brisbane, and author of the wonderful books of classic Moreton Bay Cruisers about the wooden boats built or rebuilt over the past century in southeast Queensland. Andrew grew up in Brisbane in a family that always had boats and enjoyed spending many hours exploring Moreton Bay. So his love of Moreton Bay goes back to his childhood. His family acquired a wooden boat in the 1970s, and he bought his own boat when he was just 13. Since then, he has had many different boats and enjoys boating with his family on his present cruiser. After gaining his real estate licence in 1987, Andrew worked on major office projects in Sydney before returning to Brisbane to set up his own company, the Cornerstone Property Group, specialising in property development and consulting. He has assisted the Brisbane Grammar School with the development of their integrated learning centre, as well as the Brisbane City Hall restoration. Welcome, Andrew. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me.
So tell us more of growing up in Moreton Bay as your playground when you were a kid.
Well, it has changed over the decades, of course, but it was a great way to grow up in Moreton Bay, a very clean, healthy, natural environment. And, it's still a great way for families to grow up on Moreton Bay. I started boating probably when I was 2 or 3 years old.
And you got your first boat when you were 13? You bought your own boat, I think, when you were 13.
I did. It was one of those things that you could do in those days. You could even get your licence at a younger age in those days. And so, I had a small tinny and used to go camping on the bay with friends and fishing, and you'd live off the bay. You'd go out for a week or two during school holidays and catch crabs and fish, and that's what you would eat.
Mucking around in boats.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a great way to grow up, as I say, better than sitting and looking at devices.
And it's such an incredible stretch of water,
It
isn't
is,
it?
yeah. Mostly protected, which
Yes.
is part of the appeal, yes.
The late, great sailing stalwart, Greg Cavell, once said, "A boat is only as good as the laughter that comes out of it." But the other famous saying is, "A boat is a hole in the water you pour money into." But I bet there was a lot of laughter that came out of that first boat you owned.
Absolutely.
It did cost a bit of money every now and then.
Yeah, there's no doubt that it's an expensive hobby to have. But there are many things in life that, that cost money, and all you've got to show for at the end of the day is memories and experiences. And I've always thought that when you come to the end of your days, what you recall is those experiences, memories, and, of course, achievements. They're the things that really matter.
Captain Cook sailed past Moreton Bay in 1770, but he didn't come in.
No, he missed it.
I know. Why do you think he didn't come in? Tides?
I think it's probably too shallow to navigate and too risky.
Right.
When you're doing a whole coastline, which, as you know,
Yes.
is thousands of miles long, you can't investigate every nook and cranny. So if it's an easy harbour to enter, like Sydney Harbour or
Yes.
Port Stephens, I'm sure you can drop in quite readily. But to come into Moreton Bay is very challenging.
But he named it. And he left it to Matthew Flinders to actually come into
Yes, well,
later.
It was early on referred to as Glasshouse Bay, of course, because it was considered just to be a shallow bay, if you like, or not a full bay with a river. And the river wasn't discovered initially either. It took subsequent sort of investigations to discover the river.
And amazingly, it has remained without any bridges sort of joining up all the islands, which is what's part of its charm, I would say, isn't it?
It is. Well, of course, they were proposed. The Russ Hinds, the Minister
Yes.
for Main Roads way back in probably the 70s, did propose a bridge to Russell Island, and it didn't succeed. But hopefully we've passed that point now where we'd look at bridging the islands.
Because actually the same talk goes on in Tasmania with Bruny Island. They're forever sort of jokingly saying they'll put a bridge there, but of course nobody ever has, and it's the ferries going backwards and forwards. But it certainly adds to the charm of both Bruny and the Moreton Bay Islands. But the only thing is when you're at Anchorage and the ferries go whizzing past, it's...
There's certainly a lot of ferries now, but I think if you don't put bridges to the islands, then you leave them as being a very distinct destination, distinct from the mainland, whereas if you put a bridge across to them, they become very much like the suburbs of the mainland. So I think one of the charms of southeast Queensland and Brisbane and the Bay is that there's such a variety of destinations you can go to that are all quite unique in their own way and have their own appeal. So we don't really want to make them all the same. I think let's leave them unique.
I think that's a great way to go because, as you say, otherwise it just becomes like another suburb, really,
Yes,
doesn't
exactly.
it? Yes.
Yeah.
As I said before, Andrew has written the most wonderful book, or books, I should say, which are called Classic Moreton Bay Cruisers. And it features a tremendous amount, whether they're huge, large cruisers like Valley High 2 or tiny little boats similar to. I'm just trying to think of the name of the little one that we had there. I think I'll come across that in a minute. But you've got a tremendous variety of boats, haven't you, in there?
We have. Across the books, which I first published 14 years ago, 2009 was the first book, we've now featured 111 boats, all up.
Yes.
And the central theme is that they are all wooden boats that have been designed or built or rebuilt here in southeast Queensland.
Yes.
And it really became apparent to me, I suppose, when we bought our family cruiser in 2005, so I published a book 4 years later, was the uniqueness of the wooden boats. They're all different, and how everyone seems to love them. If you've got a classic cruiser and you arrive in a bay, that everyone watches you arrive and everyone gets in the dinghy and comes have a look. If you pull up in a marina, people will walk down and admire your boat. And that sort of admiration doesn't apply to boats that are mass-produced. You don't get the same reaction. And so I was observing the way people react to these boats and understanding why, because they are hand-built, built by craftsmen. And Brisbane has a proud history of wooden boat building and something that probably people have never really focused on or pieced together. So as I started to collect boats that I could feature in such a book, that history of Brisbane became so predominant as a feature that the heritage of the talent that was here.
And many of them are built by Norman R. Wright, aren't they? Yes, and that's an incredible amount of fabulous boats have come out of that yard.
Yes, over 110 years of productivity out of Norman Wright. And in my first book, I had a bit of a family tree done, which showed where the talent came from and how people evolved into the industry. And there was a boat builder called J.H. Werrett, who was really the first predominant boat builder. And he trained some of the right people, and then Norman R. Wright's formed, and then Norman R. Wright trained a lot of people. And out of Norman R. Wright, a lot of other tradespeople became masters of their trade and started their own practice building boats. And so you can see how it all links back to a lot of the wooden boat builders that are here in Brisbane were trained at Norman Wright, and Norman Wright trained with J.H. Werrett. So you can see where it's all come from.
Absolutely incredible craftsmanship, really, isn't it? And whether it is, as I've come across that little one, which is the 20-foot Molly, I think was the first boat you photographed, wasn't it, for Classic Moreton Bay Cruisers? Yes. Was that actually, who can you remember who built that?
Yes, that was built by Nichols Brothers, and Nichols Brothers built a lot of small wooden boats and down at Wynnum.
Right.
And they ultimately, with the evolution of fiberglass for boat building, they became cruise craft, and that is the Nichols family. So my family had a lot to do with the Nichols brothers. We had, when I was a child, my parents had a number of wooden speedboats built by Nichols brothers, and then when they moved into fiberglass, we bought their first ever fiberglass boat that they built, a speedboat. So they've been around a long time, and like Norman Wright, a fantastic heritage of building wooden boats. In fact, Ian Wright, who is the grandson of Norman R. Wright, he did his apprenticeship with Nichols.
Oh, right.
Nichols Brothers, yeah.
Right.
So, once again, more connections there in the industry. But, yes, Molly at the time was owned by Tony Love, who had...
She was built in 1949.
That's right.
Yep.
Well, it was his father's boat.
Oh, right,
And that boat, which is only 20 foot long or something, his father used to go offshore, off Moreton Island, and stay out overnight fishing for snapper in that 20-foot boat back in the 50s.
Wow.
Yeah. So amazing stories come out of that boat. But yes, it was the first one that we photographed, and she is beautiful.
Very special. In Tasmania, a lot of the boats are built out of hewn pine, including one my husband and I had. But there aren't so many up here in Queensland that are built out of hewn pine. It's more other woods that are predominant, really. So which would you say are the most predominant that they're built out of?
Probably some of the gum,
Yes.
like spotted gum and blue gum. The hewn pine is a Tasmanian timber, and it is a highly regarded boat building timber because it's fairly resistant to borer attack because of the natural oils that are in it. So we have a similar timber in quality, at least, up here, which is turpentine. And turpentine was harvested off Fraser Island for a long time, and it was used to build a lot of bridges and jetties, like the one at Harvey Bay.
Oh, okay, yes.
That was all built out of turpentine because it would last for 50, 60 years at least, and was resistant to borer attack. But so there's a few boats built with turpentine, but mostly you'll find the older boats were built with spotted gum, which is a hardwood.
Right.
And as time went on, they then started to introduce Oregon and build the actual hull to the waterline with spotted gum, and then Oregon for the balance of the top side. So they're the most common timbers used up here.
And marine ply?
Well, over time, marine ply did come into its own, and certainly a lot of the superstructure is built with marine ply. But ply's sort of, now being overlooked for the more modern composite products which are resistant to moisture.
I just noticed a few in your book were actually about marine ply.
Yeah. And look, ply is viable if, like a lot of these things, if you maintain them, paint the boat and slip it regularly, a lot of those timbers are still viable,
Yeah. And hewn pine, of course, is incredible. There's trees in Tasmania that are 2,300 years old.
That's right.
In stands that are many, many years older than that.
Well, Tassie's got some great timbers, King Billy pine, and there's other excellent boat building timbers down there. But the source of them is now very limited, and I think that a number of people down there are rescuing old logs out of dams and so on to get to that timber because they can no longer harvest it, which is understandable.
Now, you did recently take your cruiser down to Tasmania for the Tasmanian Wooden Boat Show, which is Rob and I actually went, I was telling you before, 1994 to the very first one. And now, of course, it's huge and boats from all around the world. So you took your cruiser down there, was it last year?
Yes, we went down for the show that was February 23.
Yes, of course,
yes. And I think we were one of about half a dozen Queensland boats that made the trip down there.
Right.
And so there was a group of Queensland boats that were featured there, and there was special tours you could do. So if you wanted to do a guided tour with some volunteers to look at Queensland boats and understand, why they're a little different to boats built elsewhere in Australia, you could do that. So we had our boat in the show, and we were part of that tour. So people would come to us twice a day and have a look at the boat, and we'd have a bit of a chat about, what it meant to be a Queensland boat and why they were different.
Right, right.
So Queensland certainly has a vernacular style with its boats, and that's part of the reason why I did the book, because I knew that there's people all around Australia that will come to Queensland to buy a Queensland boat.
Right.
And, of course, yes, Tasmania has also its own vernacular style, mostly from fishing fleet style of boats. But there are people that really cherish that particular style of boat and seek out that sort of boat. So the Queensland boats are distinct because most of them were built to cruise the Queensland coast.
Of course.
A lot of people did an annual trip to the reef.
Yes.
And, it's tropical, so you need to have a lot of sunshade, and you need a boat that's seaworthy to go to sea and can do long distances. I mean, Queensland's a big place, so there are long distances involved to cruise the Queensland coast and to go to the outer reefs. So, all of those requirements have meant that we have developed this vernacular style of boat, which is highly regarded.
Exactly. And Tasmanian ones, as you say, need to be hardy. I always remember the great yachtsman Hedley Calvert saying that there was no point in buying a boat in Tasmania unless it had a shed on the back.
Yes.
You certainly needed it down there. But now, when you produced your book and books and whatever, it must have taken you a huge amount of time to coordinate not just finding the boats, but then finding the time to go and photograph them and work out where they are, because they were in all different places from here in around Queensland down to Sydney and
and across to Perth as well, and Gladstone.
Okay.
We covered a lot of Australia to photograph them, and you're right. There was a lot of research involved and a lot of logistics in getting it done, and particularly as I didn't do the photography, so I had to employ a photographer.
Right.
And that adds to the cost and adds to the logistics, of course, but I wanted a very good result. And David Miller did the photography, had spent a career photographing prestige homes.
Yes.
So the interiors are a major feature in my book. The photography is so beautiful of interiors. And it's hard to shoot interiors because the light and reflective surfaces and so on. So he's particularly good at that. But, yeah, we had the help of people like Ian and Bill Wright at Norman Wright, who sponsored the book, and some brokers like Garth Fielding from Anchorline on the Gold Coast, who's been a boat broker for over 40 years and sold and resold a lot of these wooden boats.
Right.
So those contacts were able to link me up with a lot of the current owners and past owners. So progressively I would approach those people and certainly made it easier saying, well, this is a new book to be sponsored by Norman R. Wright and Sons. That helped. And, in probably 95% of the cases, the owners were receptive and were happy to display their boat in the book. We lined them up and then we got the photographers in. We waited for the weather, of course, which is always a hassle. And then we did the photo shoots and
I must admit they are magnificent photos.
Absolutely.
I spent Sunday afternoon just drooling over the interiors of some of them.
Yes, and I do too. I still sit there and look at it, and all of the books I'm happy to have a coffee and look at them again. It's not as if I'm immune from it as well. But look, it's a big exercise, but there's a lot of pleasure in meeting the owners, meeting previous owners of looking at these boats and understanding, because they are all unique, understanding their history, how they're designed and built. There's no doubt that it's been a highlight for me. It's been a highlight for my photographer, and in this more recent edition, we had a photographic team because my original photographer retired. So I got him back in to be the director of photography, and we had a young team of photographers there who benefited from his experience. And that gave us a different angle because, 14 years have evolved since the first book and photography's evolved.
Oh, of course.
So,
yes, definitely.
So the quality of the photographs is a lot greater in this more recent volume.
Right. Well, they're pretty good in the first. Now, you're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald, and my guest today is Andrew Harper, who, amongst many other things, is the author of the wonderful series Classic Moreton Bay Cruisers. So going back now just to some of the boats that you do feature in the book, Bandana is one that we were very lucky, I must admit, Rob and I, when Joe and Peter Dan built her in 2002 to sail up the coast of Queensland with her. And I noticed that she's now recently changed hands. She had a blue hull at that stage, and now she's got a white hull. So you feature not just boats that are going back, as I say, 1949, but also ones that were built in this century as well.
That's right, Rosemary. I decided to cut the boat into sections, and the book into sections, should I say. The first section was about traditional classics, which are, the old-fashioned plank-on-frame boats, which are built in the traditional way. They've been built for hundreds of years. And then I noticed that there was a new evolution of boats which are built with composite construction, and so Bandana is one of those. So I put those boats into a section called Contemporary Classics because they are built the same way Norman Wright now builds pilot boats.
All right.
Which is basically 3 layers of diagonal timber.
Right.
All epoxy glued together, making an enormously strong hull that, for the pilot boats, which have to bounce off ships and go out in cyclones and so on, they're very, very strong boats. So that's the modern way Norman Wright build wooden boats and for one-off boats, as opposed to a fiberglass mass production boat that's popped out of a mould. These are still hand-built, but they're laid up, as it were.
Right.
I created the 2 sections for those 2 different style of boats. And in the most recent volume, I added another section, which is the small and open boat classics. where some of those boats you've referred to, the smaller ones, a 20-foot open, old-style putt-putt, as it were,
Right, yes.
are featured in that because there's still plenty of people love those classics as well.
Yes.
In this current volume, we've got one wooden classic there, which is a reproduction of a riverboat, from a steam riverboat from London.
Right.
So it's got a steam engine in it, but a wooden
Yes.
hull. So it's owned by a Brisbane owner and often cruises the Brisbane River. So it's a classic that people wouldn't expect to see in the book, but having a steam engine is very, very atmospheric, let me say. So we've got something like that. We've got another boat, which is the oldest floating Norman Wright boat is in there, which is, I think she's about 21 or 22 feet, called
Not Flamingo?
Jeanette.
No,
Jeanette.
Jeanette, right.
I think she was built in 1911 from memory.
Right.
So a very, very old boat,
Yes.
over 110 years old.
Oh.
Been up at Noosa for the last 50 or 60 years.
Right.
Kept in brilliant condition by the current owners. And that was a pleasure to go to Noosa and to see
Yes.
that boat and to photograph her
Right.
as well. So, there's a couple of little surprise boats in the book where people might be expecting to see big glamorous boats. Well,
Yes.
we've also got the historic smaller ones as well.
And every boat has a story to tell. I must admit, we had a boat, Oceania 2, which was a very pretty boat. And evidently Claudia Schiffer was in Sydney Harbour and she insisted on going out on that boat. But Dolly Parton, I gather, and read it actually in your book, went out on a charter on Flamingo.
Yes, that's right.
And Flamingo had actually gone aground earlier on, but I hope she didn't go aground with Dolly on board.
You're quite right. Look, every one of these boats has got an enormous number of stories that come with it, and most of the stories get relayed to me.
Yes.
And some can be printed and some can't. So
Yes.
there's always the occasional story where the owner will say, look, I'll tell you about this, but you can't print it.
Yes.
And, of course, they're the most interesting stories.
They are.
But, that's part of the appeal of these boats. I mean, it's
Yes.
not that dissimilar to a heritage house, where a heritage house might be famous because of who's designed it or who's lived there or
Yes.
events that have happened in the home. And, people say, well, if
Yes.
walls could talk. Well, these boats have similar sort of histories. And so what I've attempted to do is give a little potted history on each of
Yes.
these boats because the stories about the boats, the things that have happened on
Yes.
these boats, they're all intertwined with Brisbane families.
Yes.
So you find the big connector with all these boats is the people that have owned them and their friendship group that have enjoyed them. And so a lot of people that buy my books aren't boat owners and maybe have never owned a boat.
No.
But they've had friends that have owned boats and they have
Yes.
precious memories of
Yes.
time spent down the bay on these boats. And,
Yes.
and they'll buy my books to bring back those memories, to bring the memories to life. And I've had some amazing photos sent to me of people. A lot of my customers are women and they buy
Yes.
for their sons, for their husbands, for their fathers. And I've had some great photos come through where I remember one in particular. A photo came through of this lady's father in his favourite chair
Yes.
on Christmas Eve, reading my book with tears rolling down his
how
face.
lovely, yeah.
And the note that came
Yes.
with the email said, well, look, he knew he was getting your book for Christmas.
Yes.
He couldn't wait to Christmas Day, so we've given it to him on Christmas Eve, and here he is, and the tears are rolling down his face. So they're great stories, great feedback to get.
And it's wonderful, I think, having the human interest story, which you do so well in the book. Greg Cavell did up or restored, it came across to me, a number of the boats that you feature in your book. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but he leaves a wonderful heritage behind, doesn't he?
That's right, and his family is still into boating
Yes.
as well. One of his sons bought our previous boat.
Right.
Another son has a beautiful boat down the coast that's in the first book.
Yes.
His daughters are involved, one with the sailing boat, another one with another boat that's in the most recent volume. So he's certainly infected the family with,
Yes.
with the love of boats. But Greg, for a long time, ran the Breakfast Creek Hotel. And right being opposite Breakfast Creek,
Yes.
from his youth, he would admire the boats in Breakfast Creek and often end up buying them and owning them. And restoring them was one of his passions. So when you go through the book and you see
Yes.
the boats that Greg owned, there's a common theme with the way he restored them and fitted them out. He made them very, very beautiful.
In fact, he says you say that he said in the book that he saw Bally High out through his kitchen window, I think, and had
Yes.
admired her for many, many years. And then he ended up owning her.
That's right, exactly. That was at Paradise Point on the Gold Coast.
Yes.
And she moored opposite his house, and he had a round window in the house which perfectly framed Bali High.
Yes.
And he admired her for a long time and couldn't help himself and ended up buying her, yes, exactly.
So now you've spent a lot of time around Moreton Bay and obviously further afield, but what would be one of your favourite anchorages around Moreton Bay?
Yeah,
or are there too many to
It's an
to
interesting
isolate?
question. When I was growing up, we spent a lot of time in the Southern Bay,
Yeah.
and probably because my parents were a bit nervous about the weather
Yes.
changes in the northern part of the bay. So I spent a lot of time in the Southern Bay, which I enjoyed as a child. But as I've become an adult and explored the top end of the bay, my favourite anchorage is probably the Sandhills
Yes.
at Moreton. I think that's substantially an all-weather anchorage other than for a strong westerly. But always plenty of room. You can always get a spot there. Beautiful beaches there, good crabbing. So it's a great spot. And I also like Mayura. Mayura is a very good protected anchorage on Stratty. So the Northern Bay is probably something now that I spend a lot more time in the Northern Bay.
Yes.
And a lot of it's a little bit, how do you say, it's sort of not unknown, but maybe a little underappreciated, for all the people that live in Brisbane and southeast Queensland. I still think there's only a smaller percentage of people that realise how beautiful, our bay is, how beautiful Moreton Island is and Stradbroke, and get to enjoy it with the frequency that they should enjoy it. So it's interesting. And then when you hear the governments, local and state government, promote southeast Queensland for tourism, they rarely talk about the bay.
Yes.
They'll talk about other aspects which are all, worth promoting. But it's funny, the bay doesn't get quite the mention. It's pretty much of a local secret to a large extent.
Yes.
And I can see that's changing now. There are now riverboats that will run out of the river and out to the bay.
Yes.
And we do get cruise liners come in now and they'll anchor off Tangalooma and take people across to the beach at Tangalooma. So it is changing.
And the variety, as you say, is incredible. I mean, you can be cheek to jowl in tipplers, or you can be, which is one of Rob and my favourites, is around in Browns Bay, where you're there totally on your own.
Absolutely.
Now, I was going to go on and chat to you about property as well, but we are running out. We might have to leave that for another time, except I will ask quickly. Real estate, whether commercial or residential, changed totally with the lockdown, didn't it? And suddenly everybody was selling all their city properties and rushing out to the country to buy farms and whatever. And it was always the saying in Tassie, as I had when I was selling real estate there, was that after 5 years you'll get it back to sell again. So I'm wondering what's happening in Queensland at the moment, and perhaps rural and commercial, but perhaps commercial to begin with, because that's also been hit very badly, hasn't it, by people working from home.
That's right. That's been a big feature of COVID, and there's many different views on how that will play out. I think ultimately the majority of people will return to working in their office in a normal style, a normal week. And a lot of that's about corporate culture and about training of young people working hard to be seen, to get promoted, and ambitious people. So I think we'll end up going back that way. But I think what's here to stay is flexibility. I think that there is a new understanding of employers respecting flexibility for employees.
Right.
So I think that's a step forward that will stay with us.
Yes.
But I think that we will revert back to the previous practices in the majority of circumstances.
Right.
Yes, you're right about the tree change. A lot of people realised during COVID that they could live at Byron Bay, live at Noosa, live on a farm and still be productive for work for a city employer.
Right.
So, I think some of that will also endure. But it depends on the industry, the nature of the employees and what sort of work they're doing. Right. So it's a bit of an industry by industry sort of analysis is needed there.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that. So, Andrew Harper, thank you very, very much for sharing your thoughts and your book, I should say, with us. And, I just think the book is an absolute credit. And it's a collector's item that people will, as you say, I think, looking back in 100 years' time, will be still looking through your book. The book is available. It's called Classic Moreton Bay Cruisers. It's available on www.classicmoretonbaycruisers.com. And thank you, Andrew Harper, once again.
Thank you, Rosemary. My pleasure.
And thank you, listeners.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.